this terrain.
In Spore, we're sort of, in some sense, teaching the computer to fish for all of these things. How do you generate a mesh? How do you make an animation across, work across multiple creatures and things like that? The programming becomes sort of this teaching process of the computer as opposed to this telling it how it is.
But, that's something that involves kind of deep, scary voodoo math. It's the kind of thing where you just kind of put, a couple really sharp guys on it and sit back and give them a year and cross your fingers and hope for the best. That could have sunk the whole project had Chris Hecker and his group not been able to kind of crack that nut.
There were software packages out there that could take an animation and extrapolate it and take it from one 3D package and put it into another 3D package form. But there wasn't anything really like make an animation and then it'll play on any kind of crazy character or creature. There was nothing like that. This was, you don't know who your actor is. It might have 8 arms, it might have 8 legs, it could have 3 heads, 7 mouths, we don't know. But you have to make an animation and a system that will accommodate whatever the character is, whatever the player comes up with, the animation has to work. So this is Spasm. This is a tool that we use every day to create the animations of the creatures in Spore. So on this standard sort of biped character, what you would do in order to animate it would be to grab one of what we call the end effectors. In this case, it would be the left hand, and you'd move it. And that's the way you would animate. And as you see, as I move that one, they all move. So if I took the character like this, rotate around him, and play an animation, this is one of our standard happy animations where you can see he does a little hop, and then he does a little laugh at the end. So we do this animation. It takes us a few hours to get something like this in place. Then the next step would be to do a lineup of characters and see how well this animation reads on the rest of them. So now we have this entire set of creatures, and as you can see, as you go down the line, there's some pretty goofy looking ones, multiple legs, maybe some really short tiny arms, maybe some really long arms, no arms at all. You have this, and then we play that same animation. Here's our original guy. You play that same animation on them, and you try to see, okay, can we tell that they're jumping? Can we tell that they're clapping? Can we tell that they're laughing? And for the most part, you can see as you go down the line, well, yeah, they're all pretty much doing this motion, and they're doing it pretty well, and it's readable. So this would be considered a successful animation.
Fun thing about Will is that the challenges that he presents aren't just the challenges that you've already solved 100 times in other games. They're really weird and new challenges, and coming up with good answers for them is the essence of creativity.
Spore was a very challenging project because we were trying to innovate in so many dimensions at once. There was a lot of innovative design involved, a lot of, fairly deep technology. Huge challenges in terms of we had all these different genres of gameplay that you go through across the levels, but yet we wanted to have the player to feel like it was the same game. Roughly the way the controls worked and the camera and the interface had to feel fairly consistent across levels, even though we're dealing with things like first-person eaters, like a first-person shooter. RTS, Pac-Man, all these different genres have to feel, basically live under the same control system.
We did have 5 different games of really different styles, and making sure that the player experienced it as this overall journey, that they were taking their creation from cell to creature, tribe, civ, and ultimately into a spacefaring race. That was a unique challenge because we had come up with different genres.
Getting that aesthetic smoothness that you could normally kind of take for granted when you have complete control over every aspect of the game, and suddenly your player actually has most of the control. It's quite challenging.
So Spore is a world where there's lots of different colors. Of course, the player can decide that they want to have a very colorful creature, or the player can decide they want to have a gray creature. And so you've got kind of open-ended color choices that the player's making at every stage of the game. But all this has to sort of blend together into one coherent world. And so we spent all this time making it so that the skies had sort of these beautiful colors that were informed by the color of the sun. So you'd have the sun up there, and then you'd get this glow of sunlight through the atmosphere, and that would tint and diffuse through the land, and so the land would blend into the color of the sky. And then the creatures who are walking around, if they're purple, if they're green, if they're gray, it wouldn't make much difference, would all be lit properly by sort of the golden light of sunset, for example, or the bluish light of midnight. And so no matter what choices the player makes in terms of color, we had to make sure that they all integrated cleanly into the color palettes of the worlds.
We knew that basically almost everything in the game wanted to have a procedural or generative basis, so the computer could create animations, planets, models. One of the things that I thought was just kind of out of the realm of possibility for us was having the computer compose the music procedurally on the fly. And that was something about halfway through the project. Brian Eno came on, got involved, and he was kind of like the key to that, and so we actually ended up achieving that as well.
Brian Eno came in about 2 years ago in the project, and he came in right at a really great point when we had just gotten sort of into place some of the technical tools we use to write the music in real time. And so when he first arrived, he spent about a week here, would make amazing sounds, and we would sample them and get them playing back, and Will and Brian and I would all sort of just be, hunched over the computer for a while and coming up with ideas. Yeah, all the voices of the creatures are determined by the mouth that you place on the creature, and also the intelligence level of the creature. So, and the main chunk of the voice work was focused in creature game, and there's 10 rows of mouths you can choose from. And then on top of that, they also scale their sounds based on how large or small you make that mouth part. So if you place on a bird part and scale it very large, you get a deeper sounding creature.
The Sims players were browsing the web to find content to download in their games, and Spore is actually part of the gameplay, that you fly around and you actually encounter stuff that other players have made, making the creativity part of the gameplay. So as you play the game, you are automatically creating new life forms, new civilizations, etc., that automatically get shared with other players. You don't have to go out to an external website and download it and then reboot the game up. It's just part of the kind of game loop.
There will be millions and millions of pieces of user-generated content, and the content is so vast. There's just this huge amount that we need to organize, because any one viewer is never going to see all of the content that's ever created for Spore.
I think Will says you can play it for about 70 years and never see the same planet. The Sporepedia is your multi-purpose asset browser. Basically, it's the place in the game that you're going to interact with the community. It's the place that you're going to interact with all of the creations that you've downloaded, all the creations that Maxis has made.
This is sort of the encyclopedia of everything that's been created in Spore and everything you have in your game.
So one of the great things about the Sporepedia is when you're in the midst of your game and you come across another creature and you want to have more information about it, you can just hit a key and bring up Sporepedia and get all of the information about that creature. You can comment on other people's creations. You can look at their creature or their building, whatever, in their Sporepedia card, and then there's an area for you to make comments, and it can be displayed on their card for anyone to see. So that's kind of a fun way that users can interact with each other in the massively single-player universe of Spore.
We have this idea that the way that users can get the best content is by using the collaborative player consciousness to find the best content, because there's going to be a lot of content that people make. So we've put in these tools that allow the actual user community to tell us what they think is the best. So we've put in keyword tags that people can search for things that are over certain themes and find groupings, like help get a smaller window into that vast world of content.
So one of the things you can do with the Sporepedia is create something called a Sporecast, which is basically a collection of assets that all form a certain theme. So, somebody could make an entire Sporecast that's all edible food or puppies or anything you can imagine. And then you'll be able to play a game of Spore using that Sporecast. So everything you see in that game will be coming from that feed.
I see Spore as having 3 equal parts. One part is creating things, one part is sharing things, and the other part is playing with those things. I think the important thing to remember about Spore is it's not a game with creativity tacked on the side. It's creativity and a game at the same time, and then sharing as a core preset. It's going to be very interesting to see people's reaction when we ship it, because that's an unusual layout for a game.
We're really just getting to that first wave of what Spore is all about. Because it's so much about those creativity tools and about that sharing, we fully expect that this thing really just starts to have a life when we ship.
Once you've given the player the means to create these wonderful little toys, they're going to want to do a million other things with them. And so we're going to be spending a bunch of our time, I'm sure, coming up with new ways that players can play with the stuff that they've created, potentially outside of the context of the game of Spore.
It's going to be crazy when the game ships, and I know that on day 1 of ship day, I will be sitting on our website, hitting refresh, and waiting to see what crazy stuff comes up.
My thought is I'm going to stand outside stores with a Sharpie and offer to sign copies of Spore.
The 8th of September, I have made my team promise me that we are going to be somewhere in Mexico on a beach drinking heavily.
Personally, I hope people just enjoy it. I feel like we've put a lot of stuff on the table, and I hope people just pick up parts of it and enjoy that experience.
Definitely there's a big anticipation. I'm really curious as to what the world will think of it. There's been a lot of hype and anticipation around the game, so that's a little scary, but I think there's so much creativity and fun to be had in Spore that it can't be anything but a hit.
There are people in the office who've been working on this game on and off for 7 or 8 years, and I've never worked in a game where that's been the case.
By the time Spore ships, I will have been on Spore longer than I was in high school. I will almost have been on Spore longer than I was in college. And I was in college for a long time.
When you work on a project that goes over a long period of time and you have a group of people together for a series of time, one of the things that we expect to be putting in the credits is how many Spore babies have been born during the production of Spore. At last count, gosh, I think we're up to 7 or 8.
One person has had 2 babies. I know of several engagements. 5 or 6 weddings.
I've been on it long enough, I've been on this project long enough that like any kid that was born early on is probably already in kindergarten or first grade. And
so usually when I get near the end of a project, I get distracted, start thinking about, oh, what am I going to do next, or what other ideas, because there's really no lack of ideas. I've never had that problem at all. It's lack of time to pursue ideas.
Will has, and he still has, the idea of doing a live stage production based on Spore. So imagine a giant dome with actors playing the part of an evolving Spore species. Will loves that idea. It's a musical, and I think it's going to happen.